even though I'm not Anderson. Welcome to another wonderful part of Define '09, which followed Educate '08. I'm not sure what 10 is going to bring at this point. I'm Bob Hacker. I'm chair of the Department of Journalism, Media Studies, and Public Relations. And I have a tremendous job this afternoon because it is so easy to introduce our speaker. We have a full house. So you're here undoubtedly because you are familiar with Anderson Cooper 360, which is a program that you can see on CNN, obviously. If you were watching last night, you saw it live from Detroit, or just outside Detroit, in Warren, Michigan, as part of the rescue series that CNN is doing on the economy. You may also be familiar with his work as a part-time correspondent for CBS's 60 Minutes. So you're not here to hear me, you are here to hear Anderson Cooper.
Thank you very much for braving the rain for this. I hope it's interesting for you. I must admit, I always find it odd to hear myself introduced as a television anchor. I never really set out to be an anchor. I was always rather suspicious of anyone who tells me that that's what they want to be. It's like a kid who tells me they want to be a politician. I think you should be a real person before you become a fake one. But I don't, no offense to any politicians in the crowd. I don't often make speeches. I like talking to groups like this, and especially on college campuses, but I'm actually one of the few anchors who doesn't like to hear himself talk very much, so I hope tonight can be something of a conversation. And I thought I'd just start tonight a little bit by talking about kind of how I got into this odd profession and what it's like reporting today on some of the biggest stories of our time, both overseas and here at home. And I also want to leave plenty of time for questions and answers, because I often think what you all want to talk about is maybe more interesting than things that I come up with on my own. As I said, I never really set out to be a TV anchor. I graduated college. There's so many weird lights and it's interesting, all this technology. No doubt someone's twittering right now. Reveal yourself. I never really set out to be an anchor. I graduated college. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life, which is, I'm sure, a situation some folks in this crowd can understand. When I graduated, I was kind of desperate, and I asked my mom for advice, which is not something I did a lot growing up. My mom is, as you probably know, Gloria Vanderbilt, and she's a remarkable lady, and a really interesting lady, and a wonderful lady, but practical, she is not. So, as a kid, I never really would ask for advice. The last time I'd asked her for advice was in high school. I was applying for a summer job as a waiter, and I asked her, what she thought I should do for the interview, and her her sage advice was to wear vertical stripes because they're slimming. So that's generally kind of a tenor of advice I got from her. But I was desperate when I graduated college, and I asked my mom what she thought I should do, and she thought about it, and she said to me, follow your bliss. Follow your bliss. That was her advice. And at the time I was hoping for something more specific, like plastics or something. But in retrospect, follow your bliss is pretty good advice. I should point out it's not original advice. It's actually a professor named Joseph Campbell, who taught at Sir Lawrence, who wrote a lot about myth, actually coined the term and used it in an interview with Bill Moyers that my mom had watched on public television. So I should be thankful my mom was not watching Montel Williams, because God knows what sort of advice she would have given me then. Probably something about getting a DNA test. But the problem, of course, with follow your bliss is it's very hard to figure out exactly what your bliss is. At the time, I certainly wasn't sure. I had a liberal arts degree, which is to say that I had no actual skill. So my options, you all know what I'm talking about. Liberal arts, it's a dirty secret. I was actually a poli-sci major, which I'm still trying to figure out exactly what that is useful for. But no offense to any poli-sci professors, to be honest. I went to college in the late 80s, and I majored in political science, and I focused a lot of my studies on communism and the Soviet Union. So when the Berlin Wall fell, I was totally screwed. And I know it's not about me, it wasn't about me, and I was happy, sort of, but I must admit it was a little bit of an upset. And I never actually studied journalism, unfortunately, but I'd always been interested in news and television, and particularly the experiences of war correspondence during Vietnam. And I'd left high school a semester early before I went to college and rode in a truck across sub-Saharan Africa. And Africa had really opened my eyes and sort of quickened my pulse. It was the first time I'd had a gun pointed at me. It was the first time I'd had to talk my way through a roadblock. Each country in Africa is so different, and ethnically and culturally, I fell in love with those differences and with the vitality of the people and the places that I visited. So I knew that I wanted to travel, and when I graduated, I decided that whatever I did, I wanted travel to be an integral part of it. So I decided to try to become a foreign correspondent, in particular a war correspondent. The problem, of course, is that it's a difficult business to break into, and I applied for an entry-level job at ABC News, but I didn't get it, which goes to show you the value of Yale education these days, so you made the right choice with Hofstra. In the end, though, I came up with this plan, which was I decided that if no one was going to give me a chance, I would have to take a chance. If no one was going to give me an opportunity, I'd have to create my own opportunity. So my thinking was that if I went to places that were really dangerous, that if I started to go to wars, I wouldn't have much competition, and I could become a reporter that way. So, you laughed, but that was my thinking. So since I wanted to be a war correspondent, I decided to just start going to wars. And a friend of mine made a fake press pass for me on a Macintosh computer, and armed with that and a home video camera, I moved overseas. And I first went to Burma, and I snuck into the jungles of Burma and hooked up with some students fighting the Burmese government, which is a struggle which is frankly still continuing to this day. And then I went to Somalia, which at the time was plagued by both famine and civil war. Right now the famine is not in place in Somalia, but the civil war continues. And until Somalia, I've really never seen starvation up close. I've never seen a child die. In Somalia, oddly enough, it was there that I knew that I'd found my calling. I knew that I couldn't stop the starvation or the war. I couldn't actually save people's lives, but I could bear witness to their struggles. I could give testimony to their lives. I was in a town called Baidoa where about 100 people were dying every day from starvation, most of them the very young or the very old. And I remember sitting in a makeshift hut and watching a man and his wife fill a kettle with what little water they had. And between them lay their young son. His body was covered by a dirty cloth. And I'll never forget, the man held the boy's head in his left hand, and slowly and sparingly the woman poured the contents of the kettle over her son. As the cloth became wet, you could see the little boy's hollowed out eyes, his ribs, his body unobscured by muscle or fat. His legs were as thin as the twigs that formed the outer layer of the hut that they lived in. They'd already watched their 3 other boys die, and this was their last, and he was just 5 years old, and this was happening 1,000 times a day in places all over Somalia. And I may have gone to Yale, but I was educated in Somalia, and Sarajevo, and South Africa, and Rwanda, and places I traveled to my first 3 years as a reporter. Places where the boundaries weren't clear, where the many chambers of the human heart are open for all to see. In those first 3 years working as a foreign correspondent, I saw more bodies than I can remember, more horror and hate than I can recall. But I also found myself continually surprised by what I saw on the far reaches of our planet, by the truths that are revealed in the dwindling light of day, when everything else is stripped away and it's raw and exposed. In war, you expect to find darkness, but you also find light. You expect to see horror, but you also find humanity as well. The problem I discovered is that the farther you go out, the harder it is to actually return home. Once you've peered over the edge, it's hard to ever fully return. I sometimes wonder if that's how astronauts feel. Once they've walked on the moon, seen its cratered surfaces up close, felt the dark side just beyond reach, do they long to go back? Do they peer up at the night sky and think about the places that they stepped? In May of 1994, after covering elections in South Africa, I wound up in Rwanda during the genocide. And I'm sure most of you know, but nearly 1 million people, about 800,000 people were killed in Rwanda in the space of about 2 months. And it was very personal murder. It was neighbor against neighbor, it was husband against wife in some cases, it was grown men killing children. And there weren't guns involved, there were no bombs, no missiles. It was very intimate killing. It was machetes, it was clubs with nails hammered into the head. I traveled with the Rwandan Patriotic Front, which are the group which is now in control of Rwanda, and they were going to stop the genocide. And I saw infants who'd had their fingers cut off. Or they used to cut the Achilles tendons of children so they couldn't run away when they were attacked. It was as if a terrible madness had descended in Rwanda. And it was there that I realized that all of us are capable of anything. We can choose to commit great acts of barbarism and brutality, or we can choose to commit great acts of compassion and kindness. The choice is up to us.